I think builders, and you can see why this is, are just so focused on the sales experience. And what they're really missing is that the bottom line is actually all in the post sale.
You're listening to Build Up, the Homebuilder podcast, brought to you by ZGM.
I'm Jordan.
And I'm Santana.
I'm a home building marketer and brand strategist.
And I'm a digital marketer and the executive producer of Build Up.
And together, we love applying our expertise to the home building industry. Join us as we uncover industry insights, chat with colleagues, and explore exciting ways to push the home building world forward.
So, Jordan, today on the podcast, we have one Scott Hamilton. He is a super knowledgeable marketer in all things home building and is actually the president of the Alberta New Home Warranty. So I'm excited to have him on today for this great conversation. Welcome, Scott.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah, so excited to have you here today, Scott. Thanks for joining us. You know, we like to think maybe it is, maybe it isn't true, but we like to think that our reach is a little bit beyond Edmonton and Alberta. So for that reason, give us a little bit of a background and introduction to Alberta New Home Warranty program, what that means.
Yeah, for sure. We're one of Canada's oldest and probably Alberta's leading provider of new home warranties. So this is a warranty that would specifically be put on new homes, 1, 2, 5, and 10-year terms for a variety of different things. We've been around about 50 years. You know, we in our time have probably warrantied about 750,000 homes, and right now have about 110,000 active customers. So lots of experience in the customer service side, the post purchase service side of things, and I think a decent perspective on what makes a great customer experience and how important the post sale experience is to buyer contentment generally.
It's very interesting, and the whole purpose of bringing you on the show today and having the conversation is around that sort of post-purchase customer service side of things. But out of pure curiosity, I'd love to know what's the number one warranty claim made on new homes?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I would say the number one claim, and this is kind of a regional thing, but I think if you're in North America and you're in a varied climate like we are, it has to be kind of concrete work, so foundations and flat work outside. There just does not seem to be a good time to pour it. It can be problematic. Climate volatility is creating some pressure on that. And then I would say secondarily, and the thing that we spend a lot of time on, and you'll see this pretty universally across North America, is moisture management. Too much moisture, not enough, not the right conditions, positive pressure, negative pressure in the home. Water management seems to be a really, really hot topic in terms of long-term home care and maintenance.
Yeah, I can imagine that. It's hard to build a home. The product is a hand-built product outside, and that adds a lot of different variables to things. But what I want to talk to you about is specifically just around, for most home builders, or I think just for home builders in general, we want to have the conversation and illuminate the fact that your role as a builder, not even just from a service and from a warranty point of view, but just generally as a builder, shouldn't end after the sale, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what are some of the things that you feel that builders are missing from the point that they make the sale and are maybe like, great, we're done here, the house will get built and it's just move along? What are some of the big things that you feel that home builders are missing after they made the sale?
Yeah, I think there's a fundamental business reason for this, and it has to do with the intangibility of the ROI on the post-sale experience, right? It's like you sell a home and you're a builder and you want to do right. I think 99 to 100% of builders in North America want to do the right thing. They're prideful in building these homes and they do that faithfully. But it's really easy to feel the tangible effects of the sales experience when what exists is, at the end of it, the outcome is a check that you put in a bank account and you open up your screen, you check your bank account, and there it is. That feels good. It's much more difficult, I think, for a builder, and by and large, and this is a generalization, to understand the ROI on something that's so intangible. Like the best that you can do with kind of the post, the investments you might make in the post sale experience is to say, well, it could have cost us more to sell that next home, or yeah, it cost us $1,000 to service that home, but it could have cost us 10. And so there's some good methodologies there. There's some good models to say it. But I think builders, and you can see why this is, are just so focused on the sales experience. And what they're really missing is that the bottom line is actually all in the post sale. That, really when you look at it, and we've got some research on this, I See What You See, one of our partners, they're one of North America's leading customer experience management platforms. They work with major builders north and south of the border. And they looked at customer experience. And what they found is that a great customer experience is 60% more profitable in the long run, provides 5.7 times more revenue, 5 times more referrals. And in our experience, what we found is that, and we do research on this every year with our customers, our policyholders, homeowners, and what we find is that those with a positive post-purchase experience had 4 times more confidence in builder reputation. And so as intangible as that may be, I mean, those are tangible numbers, but okay, what does it mean to the bottom line? There's a real need to focus on the post-purchase experience. And it makes a ton of sense, right? Because no one writes a Google experience that's like, yeah, terrible post-purchase experience, couldn't get a hold of them, they never showed up and they didn't fix problems, but man, that sales experience is second to none. Like, no one writes that. They're really, it's the what have you done for me lately? It's all about the what's happened now. And so, I think, and what we believe is that builders should really be focused on the bottom line here, which is, better margins for good customer experience, lower acquisition costs, improved reputation. And in the long run, that's how you really build, I think, this contributing sort of reciprocal model where you've got great customers and they tell other customers, and that's worth more than you could ever spend. I mean, that word of mouth is completely tangible. So I think that's kind of what's happening, is that it's really tangible to see the effects of a sales experience. It's a little more challenging to see tangible effects in the bottom line of a post-purchase, even if all of the evidence is there to say that it makes a big difference.
It's so interesting. Clients often come in, and home builders are always talking about, we need better Google reviews, better Facebook reviews, just better reviews online. But the recency effect is so important in that. Like a customer is really only going to provide their feedback on what just happened. And if that is a poor post-purchase experience, then that's the feedback. They're not going to go back, 5, 6, 8, 10 months and be like, oh yeah, Johnny who we met in the sales center was great, and we loved working with them. So yeah, it is very important to have that full kind of well thought out process and experience all the way to key handoff, but then even all the way beyond that as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is made, I think, ever more difficult and challenging as the typical buyer or maybe the buying demographic changes. And these are large generalizations, right? Like various generations, ages, backgrounds of people are buying homes, but there's a real bulk of home buyers today, especially in Canada, but in North America, who are millennial. And so 91% of new home buyers in Canada, and this comes from a Genworth study, are millennial home buyers. And that comes with it, I think, a shifting of attitudes and approach that better match the experience that millennials will have. So I'm not going to draw any generalizations about millennials. I feel like that's a real slippery slope. And I think those generalizations can be really dangerous. And I don't think they're helpful. But if you reflect on the experience, you can tell why home buyers or homeowners are having a difficult time, right? Because what you'll see, and you talk about the Google reviews, is home builders will say, well, they just don't get it. Like homes aren't perfect, and you know what, we do our best, and if only they knew how to maintain the home, if only they knew how to put their downspouts down. And I think if you ask the average new home buyer, to be honest, and I know this because we deal with this all the time, they'd be like, sorry, what's a downspout? And it's really simple things, right? Yeah, and like if you reflect on it, right, and talk about this increasingly convenient, increasingly expensive world, and you look at the experience of millennials, but everybody. So I'm just saying this because millennials are the largest home buying population right now. So if you're focusing on any experience, it's got to be kind of that general experience. This is a generation, and we're living in it now. You have an iPhone, which is an incredible, or maybe you have an Android or whatever you have, incredibly sophisticated piece of technology that does not come with what? An owner's manual, right? Cars tell you not only when you need to change the oil, now they drive for you. my watch tells me when to stand. Like I am just a houseplant in this whole mix, right? Like I wouldn't survive 1 minute outside of this. And so my watch tells me to stand. And these things, by the way, improve while you own them. Home ownership, home buying in general, and there are some phenomenal builders doing incredibly innovative things, but for the most part, it's a really archaic thing, and it just is further and further detached, I think, from what the general kind of retail experience is. And I think builders do themselves a disservice by assuming that they can be different. And we see it all the time. You look at the post-purchase experience that you would largely see in any other retail sphere, and a lot of builders will say, well, this isn't typical retail, and you're right. It's actually much worse because home buyers carry into it not only the same expectations they have on the thing that they return because they just didn't like it, and this is any experience, and it was frictionless. Except they carry into the fact that it was $500,000. And so I think there's a real lack of acknowledgement of the innovation and a real static kind of stubbornness to the way that homes are built and sold and serviced that has to change, because you're not going to change an entire generation of buyers. You're not going to change a home buyer group by saying, yeah, but that's not how it's done here. At some point, there has to be a meeting in the middle.
You bring up a really good point there, Scott, and I want to know what are the good buyers? Like, what are the good builders doing? What are some of the innovations you're seeing, and what are some things that people are doing that do kick ass and that you would recommend to other builders?
Yeah, I mean, a really great builder today does a lot of thinking about the long-term value of the relationship. And if anything, what it comes down to, and we talk a little bit about, education. And I think the keys there are really to say, well, it really has to be a shift in mindset. And so the builders are doing great things, are offering support for buyers that's timely, on demand, and specific. And if you look at the general kind of customer experience and how things are being improved there, it has to be more and more frictionless. So a great example of this is, hey, something went wrong with my home, which it inevitably will do. I mean, as Jordan said off the top, this is made by and large by people in very harsh climates for the most part. Like things happen, as they do with anything you own. How that's responded to, how much self-service there is, and the ease with which that problem is solved is probably where most of this innovation is. And then you sprinkle on top of that, terrible analogy, but you put on top of that just the use of technology in facilitating that ease, right? Like no one cares about their furnace until they care about their furnace. No one cares about their HRV. Like if you ask a homeowner today, like going to a house with a problem with humidity, HRV problem, like it's not well balanced, and you're like, hey, have you looked at your HRV lately? And I would say vast majority, there'll be people who debate this, but I think vast majority will say, sorry, what's an HRV? And when should I care about an HRV? And yet, a lot of builders will say, well, if only you had, maintained your HRV. And there's an obligation to do that. I guess our approach, and I think a more progressive approach, is to say, let's help people with this. So you ask about, like, what are some great innovations? Well, there's some great smart home technology, some great prop tech out there that can also alert, okay, there's a humidity issue in this home that could lead to problems. We've got inside air temperature, outside air temperature, changing seasons, so on and so forth. And then I think helping proactively. And I think there's a real, something else going on here from an emotional perspective too, but happy to get to that. So to your point, there's a lot of really great innovation out there. So much of it is a frictionless experience that doesn't say you're never going to have a problem, that doesn't say that there won't be issues. It really just helps people be proactive about it and self-serve. Like lots of good studies out there that say 80% of people want to solve this problem themselves, until they don't. And that's where a lot of that innovation is. And then building materials and otherwise, there's things that are happening there. But if you look at the experience, it has to match kind of the frictionless experience with an Amazon return, and not that those things are particularly comparable, but just that experience, that feeling is the same.
I think it's such an interesting, insight to look at the fact that you've got, like you said, the largest group of buyers today is millennial, and their product experiences and the kinds of products that they've grown up with were really products that, like you said again, don't have a manual, do a lot of things on their own, do a lot of things for you, tell you when to do it. Like, look at cars today. Like, when a millennial age, like a boomer or a Gen X, was buying a car, like chances are they probably knew how to change a tire. They probably knew how to change oil. They knew some basic features and functions of the vehicle. Ask a millennial today if they even know where the oil goes in the vehicle. Like, good luck. Because you're right. The vehicle says, yeah, you're due for a service. It's already been booked. Just like drive in there. But the house is so different from that. The house doesn't do any of that. You know, there's probably technologies that can help you with that, and hopefully we can get that into that in a second. But yeah, for the most part, the house is just there. It's got so many individual parts to it. Like you mentioned, the HRV, the furnace, windows, doors, sills, like all these other different elements to the house that aren't connected in any way in a centralized fashion to be like, here's your resource for everything. Oftentimes you will, from a builder perspective, new buyers will get a binder that's, 3-inch ring thick full of here's all your manuals and details. But as if anyone's ever read that and knows what's going on. But, to that end, are there any things, products or processes or things you've seen in the market, Scott, that can help home builders and then ultimately home buyers in that like new home experience, understanding what they need to do with their house, understanding the steps and maintenance and making sure that that's quite flawless and making sure from the builder perspective they feel supported and, well resourced?
Yeah, for sure. And before getting to that, just backing up a step for a moment, although I know this is your podcast, so do what you want, but just in terms of like, why is this a problem? Because you'll hear a lot of builders say, it just feels worse. Oh, it is. And our perspective of it is it has everything to do with affordability. Like research would tell you that, and I'll focus on Canada here because generalizing these stats in North America, even within Canada, even within the city province, horrendously problematic. But bear with me, just for the core narrative here is 80% of Canadians want to own a new home. I'm sure to some degree that's probably more or less the case in the US. It has a lot to do with the psychology of it, right? It's people want to own their space. It's a very deeply biological thing that's changing, and what's a home and how do I own, and is owning important? Bottom line is people, if given the opportunity, would own a home. And so when you add to that the fact that affordability is pushing this dream, and it truly is a dream for many, further and further out of reach, what you have is someone who, when they achieve it and they can afford to, 9 times out of 10, it's a stretch. Our research shows us 90% of the time, and this is for Western Canada, but I'm sure it's probably even worse otherwise, because it's relatively affordable here. They'll say it's a stretch. And what happens, right? Well, 70% of those people are very worried. The most worrisome thing to them is not that they can't afford the home or that they'll run into financial trouble. It's that something that goes wrong with the home that they can't afford to fix will actually push them over the brink. They're that tight. And there's lots of financial data that says, hey, households are tighter than ever. So you have someone who's frustrated by the fact that they've spent this much money. It's a big outlay. And psychologically, and this is deep, and I'm not a psychologist by any means, but psychologically, the home is really important to you, right? Like it becomes part of your identity. It's who you are. And you take that so personally. And what you carry into that is, oh, and by the way, this was a huge stretch for us. So it's the perfect paradox, right? It's sort of like, man, why isn't this perfect? It's $500,000. It's for many people the most expensive thing they'll ever own. It's a thing that keeps them right at the brink. So in terms of, why this is heightened, it's because, culturally, generationally, it's just getting harder to own a home, and there's less room than ever. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that are probably for a different podcast. But, that be that as it may, to your question of what can be done about it, I think the builders who are leaning into that culture of ease, that convenience, the recency and immediacy piece is really important. So the proactive, reactive. So, a really core sort of fundamental practice that we think is great is, look, the customer journey, the post-possession journey, which is, what are people worried about the next day in their house? What about a week later? What about a month later? What about seasonally? And if we can be proactive about what they need to maintain, research tells us 86% of the people that we're connected to that are customers of ours want active maintenance advice. 86%, we're like, absolutely, strongly agree. Please help us with that. So if you can do that in a timely fashion, and then if you can be responsive. So if you can source a problem, like, back to the HRV issue, well, first of all, I'm going to ask, what is an HRV? I'm Googling that, or whatever browser you're using or search, but you're going to Google it. And so if you can provide that kind of on-demand information, but just proactive, like what should I be worried about? How can you help me with? We also know that 60 to 70% of those people would pay for us to help them do that, right? Like this isn't really so much about affordability as it is ease. So if I can pay you a little bit to do that, so, we're partnered with some organizations, we're testing some stuff. There are other builders who are really, saying, okay, well, maybe there's a bigger picture here about how we can help. So, different builders are doing different things, but at the core of it, if you can provide information at the right time and be responsive, that solves like 80% of these problems. Because whenever we see an escalation, it's because, something wasn't addressed right away in the right way. People didn't have information, like basic information, put your downspouts down when it's going to rain. That if they had known that would have solved a bunch of other problems. And then they'll come back and say, well, why didn't you tell me that? Right. And I think formally to your point about the DIY culture, yeah, there are a lot of parents who walk into or, parental figures or of a generation that was maybe a little bit more hands-on with oil in their car. It's funny to use that because, many cars today, like they're like, please don't touch the oil. Just don't, even don't go near it. And yet, I actually think if we're talking about millennial buyers or the kind of large proportion of buyers today, tremendously entrepreneurial, very agile, and very DIY. Will Google like how to land a rover on Mars and actually do it, right? Like there's just a real culture to discovery and ownership that I think is just not adequately embraced here. And that gets a little philosophical, but I really am allergic to the notion that like there's a laziness to today's homeowner or there's, actually these people are insanely industrious. Like you look at the things that people have accomplished with, very little education and just experience and just the ability, the availability of information. We just need to help them focus in the right moment on the right things.
I think that's so smart. Like we often talk about the millennial and this idea of errand fatigue and not wanting to do things and et cetera, et cetera. And, all of that's true and it has its place. But when millennials, and we're massively stereotyping and grouping here, but that's okay for the purposes of the conversation. When millennials are invested in something, in their job, in a nonprofit, in a community event, and I would even argue that you could put homeownership in there because homeownership, you went through all the points before, that's such a big milestone for people. Owning a home, that's a sign of success. That's a big, step in people's lives. They're invested in that. And in those areas where millennials are invested, they're willing to put in a lot of work. And that's almost what creates the fatigue on everything else is that they're so invested in those small and in those core areas of their lives, and they're not spread across so many different things. Do you have any examples, Scott, of how this is done? So we talked about getting that timely information out, getting the follow up, having the maintenance pieces. How does a builder actually go about supporting their customer in that way?
Yeah, for sure. And just to qualify, I'm probably what would be termed a geriatric millennial. So before I throw stones, like I'm in that group. I'm right on the cusp between, kind of Gen X, millennial. So I feel everything that's there. So I'm not casting there. Although I hate the term geriatric millennial, but whatever.
I think it's hilarious.
Yeah, totally. I totally feel it. But on that, like life's busy, right? There's lots going on, and there's way more coming at you than ever before. And I will fight someone to the death on that. Like it's just true, right? Like no one can say this is easier than it's ever been. Yeah, there's things that are making this easier, but all these conveniences, like man, if they're there, why wouldn't you use them? Like. Yeah, I want my thermostat to learn these things. This is a huge like off ramp, but I want it to tell me how to be better at this. I want things to make life easier because it's just generally harder. So in terms of what builders are doing and what they're using, I think the great thing and why I feel like builders really need to lean into kind of this progressive, modern, customer experience and really look outside of the building industry by and large for this is, there's a bunch, many, whatever, however many you want to kind of put a volumetric to it, platforms that will do this really well. They actually make it pretty easy to do this, right? You have an app that caretakes for the homeownership experience. There's a reason to be in that app. There's prompts that come from that app that aren't, trading your information. They're not trying to sell you anything. They're just a way to kind of manage this. And then I think there's also just in the home, smart home technologies and otherwise that now are kind of really prompting you when you're not doing the things you ought to do. Ecobee makes some great products. Nest has some good products in this too that really know the conditions that ought to be in the home. Will alert you when that's the case, because we talk about millennials, but there's a dimensionality to that, and that 1 in 5 of those of homes purchased in Canada is purchased by new Canadians who've had a completely different cultural, environmental, climatological experience, right? And we deal with a tremendous diversity, and so having smart home products that can help kind of keep home buyers, homeowners in between the guardrails of proper home maintenance is really, really helpful. So you have both kind of the apps that will engage with a homeowner and control that experience for them. And then you also have these other products that contribute to it, that give information, that help them kind of steer in the right direction on this, much like, you look at a car and sort of lane technology, kind of the semi-autonomous. I mean, I think homes are going that way, and kind of everybody wants that, right? They don't want control, and there's kind of the big brother aspect of some of that I think people are concerned about. But for the most part, those are really helpful technologies.
This also gets me fired up as a content marketer, because there are so many great opportunities for content marketing in the customer experience, right? Like you go to Google about a problem happening in your house, and all of a sudden you realize that one particular home builder has all this kick-ass FAQ, blog content, whatever, set up in order to answer all of your questions. It's easy brand awareness. I don't know, there's a lot of exciting opportunities outside of just caring for the customers too that come from that.
Yeah, and interesting, Santan, it's a great point. If I put my marketer hat on, I would say that the big experience, we know this because we work with about 400 to 500 builders and many more in our kind of lifetime, but actively, the number one request is help me manage my customer's experience. And what they want is that content. And so we see huge engagement. We feel like a real knowledge ownership to maintaining your home. We understand what has to happen, in your warranty. We've seen all the things that could go wrong. We've seen why they go wrong. And they're not new, they're age olds. And so although there are new problems, periodically, and the way that new homes are built and creates, a momentary sort of learning curve, for the most part, that's great content. And people, being homeowners, really want it. It's just kind of this perfect storm of, hey, this is something that's really relevant to me that I want, and I'm okay with you engaging with me. And if you can make it easier, all the better. So it is really relevant content, really good content, helpful. And there's just, there's a lot out there. We help our builders by providing that service to them. And it's a really great partnership because it helps everybody wins. It's this classic win-win-win. It feels like we're in the office, but it is. It's like the homeowner's experience is better. We have fewer problems. The builder has a better experience with that customer, and everybody moves on having won, which is a great, outcome. And so, yeah, content-wise, there's just, there's lots of it, but that's also the reason having these kind of time or incident triggered sharing of that information. And so we use the Salesforce platform. There are many others out there, is really important because, again, you don't care about your HRV until you care about your HRV. And, that's just important to note. And so you need to help people parse through all that information, and doing that seasonally and in a focused way, really, really helpful.
Yeah, and I think that seasonality of things as well. You keep, and it doesn't have to be hard. Salesforce is a great example. There's HubSpot. There's so many different tools that can automate these processes. So it doesn't have to be, a dedicated post-purchase warranty person of any nature. It could be automated processes that just continue a relationship with your customer and make your customer feel taken care of, which is great. I wanted to talk about as well a little bit around if you, Scott, see in your opinion across the industry, is there sort of a glaring gap? If there was one thing that you could say to every single builder in Alberta, Canada, North America, this is what you have to do starting tomorrow, what would that one thing be?
Yeah, I wish I had the golden answer to that, Jordan, because probably you'd be talking about about my book. But I think what we've seen in our experience is, being empathetic is a really big component of being successful. So really listening to people and not just assuming that homeowners are doing the wrong thing. Like I think one of the mistakes that the industry makes, at least we see it, is they tend to look at education, like educating customers and homeowners, as something they're going to do to them. Like if only we could educate you, this would be easier. And I feel like, you really have to look at it like there's a real need for it. We can do it in a way that's complementary and needed. And we don't just have to tell them this is the way it is, so believe it. I think that being empathetic and then being flexible and adaptive, a good example of this, we do this annual survey. What we hear back from homeowners is that when we want to reach out to them, 86% want to be contacted by email. Only 3% want us to phone them. This makes a ton of sense as a geriatric millennial. Like I don't even know what my phone ring is anymore. I think it's just easier to get them a hold of me in other ways. However, when homeowners want to reach us, only 56% of them use email, 38% of them want to use the phone. So you can make some really dangerous assumptions here. So, if I had to give one piece of advice, it would be empathetic, like to be empathetic and don't worry that you're going to give it all away. Like, I think this is the big concern is that, well, if we give a little bit, next thing we know, we're rebuilding a house for them. And that's just, not true. And I think when you hear about builders or other parties talking about unreasonable homeowners, it just means that they're fighting logic. They're fighting emotion with logic. And that's kind of the thing that we find is this empathy of the experience is really important.
It's so true on, the email versus call side of things. You often get those, you fill out a form or something. It's like, do you want us to call you or email you or text you? And I'm like, email me, 100%, never call me. Santana and I were just talking before the episode on the only calls I get on my phone are spam calls or some kind of survey something, and I'm not interested. But then I think on the other side of it, as a millennial myself as well, like if I have a problem, it needs to be solved now, and I'm going to call you to get it solved now. We've got to figure this out. I'm not going to wait to email you and hope to get a response 3 days from now. I want to speak to someone and I want to get it solved now.
Yep. Yeah. And you want to be able to do that on your terms. And I think that adaptability, the flexibility, I think great builders are a lot better at this now, where, non-traditional business hours, like it's tough to get some of that stuff done during the day. Now, when we talk about expectation setting, hey, a lot of the trades only work during the daytime. Building a home is challenging. There's going to be, in the process of owning a home, some compromise on both sides. Like the availability of trades is something we deal with all the time. And as best as we can, we try and, negotiate that and schedule that on the homeowner's terms. Sometimes that's difficult, right? And so, we try and do that as much as possible. But I think, making it convenient, making it accessible, and being responsive is really critical. I don't think for the most part, people always want the answer right away. There's a tolerance to, thank you, let me look into this. I'm going to get back to you by X. Okay, great. Now you have until 2:00 the next day or whatever it is. And that, it's amazing how much that just basic hygiene and customer service just is not done consistently.
And it's so important. I just like, that's a great point, Scott. Like it doesn't have to be the answer right away, but I do think it just has to be, I know someone's taking care of this and you can give that, we'll get back to you by 2:00 tomorrow or end of day tomorrow, whatever it is. And if you have that follow through, that confidence for the building for the customer, like I think all of that is just extremely important. I think there's an element of like, oh no, I don't have the answer right now and I'm letting them down. But as long as you give them and you follow through on what you're giving them, I think that's almost more important.
Agreed.
I harp on this often in the podcast, and I will go back to my little soapbox here. I do think there's a lot of really great innovation and ideas that home builders can steal from tech as well. So when we talk about this idea of I want an answer the way that I want it now and maybe off hours, chatbots, baby, like they are great. They are easy to set up. You can put your FAQ section into it. You can have folks submit their requests through it if the FAQ can't help them. But a lot of times the FAQ can get them sorted out, and a nice, quick, easy setup automation chatbot can flow those questions through. And that thing is your 24-hour employee. So I think just like reviewing all your options is such a big thing. And it's something that tech has done forever. Like any app you interact with will funnel you through their chatbot FAQ first and then divert you to a person. But I would imagine 80% of the times it has an article that can help you.
Yeah, it's so true. And that's something that we're building and a lot of builders have built. And because you have the knowledge too, right? Like we can tell because we have all the data. I know that 75% of claims that we get are in the first year, and like 60% of those are about the two things we talked about off the top, either water ingress into the home or management generally, or some sort of flat work issue. We have the knowledge for that. So to say like, is this a problem? Should I be concerned? That's really easy to figure out. And so that self-serve kind of notion is just, really good practice. Now we could be better at it. There's work to be done to be better at it. But you're right, Santana. I think it's a big point, and it allows the customer to address that on their own terms. And if they need additional assistance, they can get it. And I think so a home can be complicated. It's scary, like and so I not everybody feels that way, but a lot of homeowners do. And so sometimes they just want to talk to a person. Great, like call us and we'll talk you through it. But lots of people are allergic to that. They'd rather deal with every manner of technology before they get to that point. And that's great. We want to be able to do that because a lot of these things have happened. We know what they are and we know how to deal with them. And homeowners can do something about them, right away.
I've got one question left, Scott, but before I ask that final question, I wanted to give you the opportunity. Got a home builder audience here. Is there anything as a major warranty provider that you wanted to share with that home builder audience now that you've got an opportunity?
No, I think it's just, I get it. Builders sell the dream, and that's what it is for so many people. And that sounds so contrived, but it's just so true. It's really hard to sell the dream and also tell people in that same way, ooh, you might have water problems, but don't worry, it's going to be okay. So, we get it. It's really tough to set, when do I set expectations? How do I set expectations? And there's a real kind of art to that. It's also, you can really overthink it. I think if builders just put their customer journey up and they put a happy face and a sad face based on the feedback and said, well, what's happening here? I think they'd be way better off. And so there's just so much value. And especially when you talk about marketing and you talk about the reputation, which is just so critical. That after sales experience, builders get scared that they're going to give it away. And I think I'd be here to say quite confidently, you're absolutely not. And by, clamming up and by refusing to deal with some of the issues that you ought to deal with up front, even if it costs you a bit of money, it's going to cost you a lot more money and heartache in the long run, because I guess our experience is saying, what story does the customer have to tell? And of course, we could always be better, and we're not perfect at this. And, we deal with a lot of different people and we learn a lot of things, but what story does the customer have to tell? Because that's the one they're going to tell. And so doesn't mean you have to give them everything. And there's certainly a line to be drawn, but there's really this kind of reticence and fear around, well, that could be expensive. Well, yeah, but it could be a lot more expensive too.
Oh, for sure. You get somebody going off online and social and chats and reviews and places on how bad your service was. That could be a lot more difficult to deal with than maybe just fixing the problem in the first place.
For sure. Yeah, and you need to set expectations, and there's definitely a line, and you want to set the right precedent. Like, you don't want to do something for a customer that you wouldn't do with another customer. But I think good builders now, homes are better quality than ever, even if that isn't everyone's experience. But that's the truth, and so it's just in how you deal with it.
I always say that your customers are the sales team you never hired. Like, you don't get to pick them, but they are your sales team, and they're either doing a great job or they're doing a bad job, and that's on you.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's so true. And they're actually probably your most influential sales force, to be honest. Really, especially if you look at the way that people join a community and the way that they look for homes. It's not unlike, the way you purchase cars, the way you look at like, people look for the worst possible reviews first, and then they're going to work back from there. Not, and it's human nature, right?
Definitely. All right, last quick question for you, Scott. What are some ways that home builders should be using, New Home Warranty program or their warranty program? Just what are some underutilized resources that you could provide to builders?
For sure. I mean, I like to tell people, and I don't think it's contrived, to say we're in the business of peace of mind, that, really when you're talking about buying a home, the confidence that we can give is the partnership in the post-purchase experience to say, look, it's going to be okay. Not only is your builder there, but we're there. And, we handle claims all the time. We stand behind it. And, I think that gives people a lot of peace of mind to say, well, the big scary things that could go wrong and push me over my kind of, monthly financial scenario will be taken care of. And so that's a big part of our role. I think our reputation, our experience, and what we contribute to, as Santana talked about, kind of the content sphere of, hey, we can help you manage this. We can help set those expectations because, you're great at building homes, and that's what you do because you're a home builder, right? And so service is a part of what you do, and you know it's part of reputation. You're thinking about long-term value, but that post-possession partnership is really what it's all about, and that's where we excel. And if you have a good warranty partner, they're worried as much about your customer as they're worried about kind of you. And we have an obligation to our homeowners. They're our policy holders and first and foremost. But we look at this as a bit of an ecosystem, and so we provide builders with support for their homeowners, and everybody wins in the end. If a homeowner is better prepared, if they're able to service their problems promptly, and if they have a good sense of confidence, that makes things a lot easier when things invariably go wrong, because this is, it's a complicated homes are a complicated thing, right? As you said there, although components might be built in a factory and, increasingly some homes are made entirely in a factory, the vast majority of homes are made on site with humans, using natural materials and in pretty harsh conditions at times. So, that's kind of our advantage. And, we've just got a lot of data on that too, about what goes wrong and what we can handle, and, how builders can improve their experience for the next homeowner. And we contribute a lot of information to that path.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Scott. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you giving us the time and coming on the show.
What a great episode. I'm so excited to talk about our big takeaways. If you don't mind, I would love to go first, Jordan.
Yeah, by all means, Santana, please.
I would say my biggest takeaway from this is just this continued idea of your customers being your sales team, and how important it is to guard your brand and to strengthen your brand by providing an exceptional customer service. So that's my big takeaway. What's yours?
My biggest takeaway, it was such a great conversation, and there were so many worthy takeaways from this episode. But I think my biggest takeaway, and you know what, this isn't a biggest takeaway just in terms of, this is what builders need to focus on, but I think this is just a great takeaway for myself and for everyone in general in the world that we live in today. And that's when Scott was talking about empathy. He spoke about it in terms of when you are dealing with your customers and the customer is struggling with something, or they're struggling to fix something, or that something's broken and they're frustrated. I think a lot of the times the reaction can be, oh, well, you didn't do it right and you missed all of this and, that's your fault, or, you should have known better. And I love when Scott talked about having empathy in those moments and really understanding that, a lot of people, this is the first time they've owned a new home. For a lot of people this is the first time they've owned a home. This is very different. It's very different than owning any other product. It's huge. There are so many pieces to it. And having that little bit of empathy, looking at things more patiently, looking at things with a little bit more understanding, I think can go a long way. And I think it can go a long way to showing the customer that you're there to support them in the long term. And I think it can also go a long way to customer satisfaction and, being the company and the builder that I think a lot of builders want to be. So that's my biggest takeaway. Empathy, I think, is missing, not just from the home building industry, but from our world in general. So there's your big takeaway for the Build Up podcast and for the world in general.
I'm giggling right now because I think about, I don't own a home yet, but I think about how poorly I treated my first car because I didn't know any better, because I don't like cars. And you know what, Jordan? I don't like homes. And when I own a home for the first time, I am probably going to see if there's an app or a guide that I can buy, like a dummy's guide to owning your first home or to home maintenance, because I wasted a lot of money on my first car fixing things retroactively that could have been prevented if I had been a good car owner. Yep. And so I love that point about empathy, because would it increase my brand loyalty if my car company was willing to work around my inaptitude? It for sure would. Maybe just because the home isn't, the home might be your cheapest model, but that doesn't mean it's a cheap purchase.
Oh, for sure.
And sometimes we forget that, right?
Absolutely. And it doesn't mean that the person buying it is going to treat it as such. Like, it's the most expensive thing they've ever bought. They're still probably going to want to treat it really well.
Absolutely. Better than I treated that poor first car of mine. RIP to that thing.
What was it?
It was a Dodge Journey, which is basically a mom van of sorts.
It was like a gift from my parents. My dad bought it because he had these 2 giant dogs and he wanted a car to take them to the dog park.
Yep.
So I got the dog mobile when I went off to college, but no one told me how to care for this slobber covered vehicle of mine, which was actually quite new and other than in desperate need of a detail, was in great condition. But anyway, yeah, that was my first vehicle that I treated poorly.
Nice. Good lessons for everyone.
Yeah.
This has been Build Up, a ZGM podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and subscribe on your favorite listening app. Thanks to Shelby, our editor, Santana, our executive producer, Scott for our original music, and you for listening along. Be sure to follow us on your favorite social platform at Build Up Podcast.